what do you think the link is between mental resilience and productivity?
If I look at how I perceive resilience, I see it as being probably 75% proactive, 25% reactive. At least once a week for an employee, like for a leader, to actually have a conversation where they ask their people one-on-one 3 questions.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? What are you working on this week? How can I best support you? So many people think that asking for help is a sign of weakness, whereas that's actually a sign of strength.
Yeah. Hi everyone, and welcome to People's podcast, Ahead of the Curve. My name is Suhini Wijayasinghe, and I'm the head of HR Solutions here at People to People. I'm excited to bring you part 2 in our 10-part series where we explore the world of work in Australia. In our episodes, we bring in guests who are leaders and uncover all the big ideas that they're thinking about and talk about their real career stories that are shaping the future. Today, we're going to have a conversation about resilience. What does it look like? How to build it? And why is it so important for leaders in this day and age going through immense change? Our next guest has been described as the Queen of Resilience by Layne Beachley, 7-time world champ surfer from Australia. She's also one of Australia's leading keynote speakers. She's also the author of the book, How to Be Resilient, and she's the founder of the Academy of Resilience. So I can't think of a better person to have on our show today. Welcome, Stacey Copas.
I am so happy to be here and to have this great conversation about resilience.
I am too. And like I said, I think all of those descriptions just, bring to light how much knowledge you have on the topic. So thank you so much for coming on the show. So can you tell me a little bit about your story and your journey to where you are now and set the scene of why you're the Queen of Resilience and what you've been up to?
Yeah, so I've come to resilience from probably a little bit of a different path. I think when most people think about resilience or their exposure to resilience, particularly in the workplace, generally they're usually dealing with somebody that's either an organizational psychologist or they've got some kind of academic background. But for me, mine's come purely from life experience. So to take you back, when I was 12 years old, I had an accident where I actually broke my neck and drowned in a backyard swimming pool.
Yeah.
And before that, I was an athlete, academically incredibly gifted. So at that time, then ending up in hospital after that injury and then having a doctor tell me that I'd broken my neck and drowned and I was never going to walk again.
Yeah.
For me at that time, it felt like a death sentence, because everything that I sort of identified as was, I wanted to be a vet. I'd just gotten into a selective agricultural school. I was the pitcher in the softball team. I was the first girl in the soccer team.
Yeah.
I was a rep runner every distance from the 100 to the cross country. And here I was being told that I was never going to walk again.
Yeah.
So, that
Devastating.
was absolutely devastating. And so for the years that followed, they were a pretty dark place. It was, I was very angry and bitter and resentful, and that was all directed inwardly because I was in this situation because of my own actions. But I was also very good at the nothing to see here, everything's so fine, just
putting the mask on,
getting on with life, because that was just how I did it. It was like just keep moving. And then if I look back at that time now, I can sort of look at it and I can go, look, well, physically I drowned once. Emotionally, I was drowning every day, for years at that time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until sort of later on in my high school years where I sort of started to sort of go, well, look, there's this thing where I need to either, give up or get on with it.
Yeah.
Because most of those high school years, my coping mechanism was getting drunk and getting stoned, and obviously that doesn't help for the moments of artificial happiness.
Yes.
Is what they were.
Yeah.
But then once I sort of got to that point where it was like, okay, got to take one of those paths. Do I let it ruin my life? Do I let it make my life better?
Yes.
And then it got to the point where I was like, I can't change what's happened, but I can change the story about what's happened, and I can change what I do from this point forward. And so that was probably a bit of a turning point. And eventually that then evolved into actually a deep sense of gratitude for what had happened.
Yeah.
And most people think, how the heck can ending up a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of your life be positive? But when people spend time with me, they realize that, I am actually very grateful about what happened and how it changed my life.
Yeah.
From that point, I sort of got a job like everyone else did. I couldn't be a vet. like I wanted to,
Yeah.
physically couldn't do the work. And so that was really difficult because I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So I sort of drifted from job to job, not really knowing what I wanted to do, and just, different jobs along the way. And then it wasn't until I was in my early 30s and I was sort of in this personal development phase. And then I had, just mentors and coaches that had sort of said to me, you need to be sharing your story.
Yeah.
And it was a particular one of those coaches that put the label of resilience
Yeah.
to what I do. And that was, that was like 13, 14 years ago now. And it was actually just this, this month is, 13 years since I left my last job in employee land, I like to call it.
Yeah.
And then, started firstly just keynote speaking. Then I wrote the book, and, that evolved into, workshops and coaching, and, and then evolved into the Academy of Resilience and what I'm doing today.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. And I think, I really love the fact that, where your journey started off had really nothing to do with work at all in terms of building that piece. And I think there's such a misconception that, the type of resilience you display in the workplace and the type of resilience that you need just in life in general are two separate entities, where it's actually completely connected. And that's something that I think is really worth exploring and having a conversation about. And you just mentioned you've had 13 years. Are there any particular highlights that really stand out to you during that time? And I would imagine that definitely writing a book is up there. Not many people can say that they're an author. But are there any key moments that really stick out?
Yeah, the book is definitely a big one. It's one of those things where people sort of say, "Oh, you should share your story." And while the book isn't my story, like there's elements of my story in there. I didn't want to write a book about my story.
Yeah.
I wanted to write a book that was going to be helpful to other people. And ultimately that was around reverse engineering. How did I get from those lowest points to where I was at that point in time? And it's actually 10 years now since I published How to Be Resilient. I think one of the highlights was getting Brian Tracy to write to write the cover endorsement. Like that kind of thing was really cool. So that was a big one. And yeah, just even, sharing my story for the first time. Like I didn't want to share my story. I wanted to go and raise awareness for some of the things that I was working on, but not directly share my story.
What was the moment where you went, I'm going to do this? What was the tipping point?
Yeah, it was actually a mentor, and I was in a workshop of his, and it was around learning to speak and write books and do PR and do all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, I just want to do that about, I'd been to the Solomon Islands and I did some mentoring with people with disability.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I want to raise awareness for these people. And then it was my mentor, Pat. He said, Stacey, you need to share your story, because it's people with a story like yours, if you don't share it, you're being selfish. And I was like, because I didn't want to share my story.
Perspective.
It was a huge perspective. And I remind myself of that regularly when I have those moments, because I said to him, I said, I don't want to share my story because everyone's going to think I'm a wanker for talking about myself. I guess it's such an Aussie thing.
It is, right? Yeah.
Also, I grew up in Western Sydney. I think being a woman as well, I think there's so much of it. We weren't brought up to actually, to really stand out and to celebrate our achievements. And so that was a really hard one to get over. And so, I did that. I spoke on one of his stages, and like a 5-minute version of my story. And then that was really the turning point.
Yeah.
And that was 14 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was the reception like in that first moment where you shared your story? And I'm sure you probably had so many nerves, like after the fact.
Before and after.
Yeah. And what was that reaction, that initial reaction, and did it surprise you? I assume it did, because of the preconceived ideas that you had.
Yeah, it shocked me because, again, I was so terrified of talking about myself. And so it was just the 5-minute version of my story. And then, there was a standing ovation. I had people laughed, people cried in 5 minutes. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And for the next 2 days at this event, then I had people just constantly coming up to me and sharing like what it meant to them.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, there might be something in this. And so that and no one called me a wanker. So not to my face anyway. But yeah, so that was that turning point where I really thought that maybe there is something valuable there, and to not sort of hide behind trying to help someone else. And just focus on, again, as this mentor said, it's not about you, it's about the audience.
Yes.
And, with the lessons that you've learned and how you've done things, then again, coming back to if you don't share, you're being selfish. And I think that is something for most people to think about, because we often think that, again, there's that self-doubt. I call it little old me. Nothing to see here, nothing special about me. And just remember, and if we come from a place of service, and that being the intention, then it makes a big difference when we do share our experience, and that can help other people.
Yeah. And look, that really ties into leadership on so many levels, right? And I think particularly women in the leadership space, in senior level roles, we're so conscious of not appearing as a know-it-all, or being condescending. And when in reality we have so much knowledge that we can share, and we're not doing our job properly if we don't share it, and grow that next generation. So I think that speaks on a lot of different levels, particularly about that, you're being selfish if you don't share it. It's so true. So, moving into how resilience is shaping the world of work, and has been for a very long time. I suppose in some ways resilience is almost like a buzzword now, and there are a lot of buzzwords associated with resilience. But taking all of that away, and all the I guess the hype in terms of what the media talk about and everything else, what does it really look like in the workplace? Like, when you're talking about being resilient, and we say it so many times, you've got to be resilient, you've got to be tough, etc. What does that actually quantify for somebody that's just, waking up this morning, going into work? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think particularly in the workplace, I've found over the years that I feel that resilience has become synonymous with coping.
Yes.
And I feel
you've hit the nail on the head there.
It's just about coping. It's just, and to me, that's like the base level of resilience. So even when people talk about, some of the things around, what is resilience, and they'll go, oh, it's about bouncing back, or it's about this. And to me, I actually don't like the phrase bouncing back, because it just implies you keep coming back to where you were. It's like, oh, we're coming back. We're coming back. There's no growth.
Yeah.
Whereas my approach to resilience is that it's all about how we grow through being challenged. It's, how do we thrive, not just survive. And I see resilience as something that's very proactive. So if I look at it, how I perceive resilience, I see it as being probably 75% proactive, 25% reactive. And so it's all about how you actually intentionally build it. And I think that's the thing is, and then especially in a workplace, like there's so many places I've had conversations with that go, yeah, we've got a resilience program. We do yoga at lunchtime. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
small part of the puzzle. So as far as that goes, I think, again, it comes back to being intentional about it. It's also not then, because sometimes I think where resilience has probably got a bad rap, particularly in a workplace thing, is where everyone goes, oh, we just give them more resilience training, without actually looking at, okay, are the workloads unreasonable? Is the communication styles not compatible? Like, are there other issues at play? Are we teaching people how to manage their energy better? Things like that. And that's where I think that, resilience is, it's tricky, because I sort of see it as, again, as I said, something how you grow, whereas people go, oh yeah, it's how you just survive. And I'm like, no, it's just so different. And so that's been the difference that I've really, shared with people.
Yeah.
Is, again, it's just about being intentional about it, and then having, simple rituals and practices that you can do on a consistent basis that build it. Much like going to the gym, because, if we go to the gym and we go, okay, we're going to work on particular muscle groups, and then we do simple but repetitive things consistently over time compound into strength.
Exactly.
And resilience is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Doing things consistently over time compounds into greater resilience. And then when you've got that, when things don't go to plan, when there's constant change, when there's challenges, then people are better equipped to actually adapt and actually grow again through that, rather than go through it or being sidelined by it.
Yeah. Yeah. I really want to unpack what you mentioned about it being coping, because that analogy, or that assessment, I should say, really ties into how employers think about resilience. because I think there's also an element, we have to be really honest with ourselves as leaders within, employing people, that there is this element of you've just got to push through. You've just got to grit your teeth and get through it. Sometimes things are tough. Now, I admit that there are times where that is relevant and unavoidable in certain circumstances. But I also think that there is an element of, it's a little bit of a cop-out as well, because then the onus isn't about looking at what do I need to change as an employer so that my employees aren't just sitting there coping and getting by. And that really, I think, ties in with what you're saying about, is the workload actually manageable? Like, I think people forget that you do need to go back to the root level to have that assessment and think about it. But that, with that coping mechanism, that's not where it should be. And I think that's where a lot of it is, and where we all fall down because we make that assessment. That's really interesting, because the next thing that I actually wanted to ask you is, what do you think the link is between mental resilience and productivity? So all things going well, say that, as a responsible employer, you've made the assessment there are reasonable workloads and there's genuine, thoughtful conversations happening between leadership and your employees. Why is it so critical to have that mental resilience, and why is it linked, in terms of why it's linked to that productivity piece and the way that they're connected?
Yeah, they're absolutely connected. And especially where there are, constantly changing priorities and things like that as well. Because that's the thing, is you may have an employee that has, okay, I've got all my tasks done and I'm organized and I know exactly what I'm doing, and they're quite comfortable with that. But then if there's something that comes in at the last minute and then that shifts, and then there needs to be a quick change to that, then that's where resilience really comes in, because you need to be able to go, okay, all right, my plans have changed, and I need to do this quickly and then come back to it. So having that resilience to be able to go, yeah, okay, I'm not going to get upset, because that's the other thing is too, because sometimes if you're being very reactive, and sometimes people can be reactive and defensive in that thing, and then instead of going, sure, okay, look, all right, I've got to do a little bit of juggling and just get into it, they might spend an hour stewing over, oh geez, this has really screwed up my day. And again, it's just that self-talk that comes into it. And that's a huge part of resilience, is that is the language that we're using in our thoughts and when we're talking to other people. And so, that's the thing is, so it's focusing on actually getting the stuff done. Whereas, as you mentioned about the gritting the teeth, and again, as you said, in really short bursts, then that can be fine, but over time, then that's not sustainable, and that's just going to be a recipe for conflict, and then also probably burnout and things like that too. But I think the thing is when you're resilient and you can keep your your thoughts on track and do that sort of stuff, then you can stay more focused. That's the other thing. So as far as being organized, being focused and managing your energy, then that's really important, but also then being able to adapt to those last minute changes, without getting upset by them.
And do you think so you were talking about, obviously, people getting quite emotional about certain situations and reacting in certain ways, and I read somewhere that one of the foundational resilient is understanding and having self-awareness of your emotions and your reactions, because everybody reacts very differently to everything. So you can never give a blanket sort of explanation to people to go, this is how you might react, or this is how you're going to feel. And there is quite a lot of self-thought and self-awareness that is involved in that piece. Do you agree with that, or do you think that there's more to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think self-awareness is a huge part of resilience, because again, if once you start to know yourself and you start to figure out, well, what are those points that you're gonna you've got your trigger points. We've all got them. And we've all got we need to have that awareness around those things too. But again, the beauty of resilience is that we all are going to have a split-second reaction.
That's right.
That's how we're wired. And that kept us alive for thousands and thousands of years.
But
what resilience allows you to do is to create that space between the reaction and the response. And so you can have that reaction internally, but then how you actually respond to it is then more considered, because again, you've got that ability to not get overly sidetracked emotionally. Again, you still feel it. And I think this was one of the big things that my views on resilience and my own experience have evolved over the years, because for many years I was just like, next, 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 next. And I wasn't stopping to feel things in the moment.
Yeah.
So we do need to actually feel things as we go. And that's where that gritting the teeth and keeping moving is not sustainable. So if we feel things as we go, then we actually, as you feel things, then you process them and you move through. Whereas if you keep blocking, then it builds up. And it's like you're dragging something heavier and heavier and heavier behind you. And there's going to come a time where it's just going to completely stop you. So I think that's where you've got that with the resilience to be able to then consider those emotions and then also respond accordingly rather than just react in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's important to highlight there that, everybody has that trigger point, like you said. And I think sometimes people get confused with having that self-awareness and self-reflecting about, okay, what are my trigger points and how do I react in certain situations? And it's not about punishing yourself. You need to be kind to yourself and go, that's okay. That's how I'm reacting. But thinking about it and actually accepting that that's the way that you react is the first step to be able to go, okay, I can have that internally, but then what's the best way forward? And I feel that step always gets missed with everything else that comes afterwards, when I think that that's probably the most important step, because you can't embrace all the change that you want to make without just going, this is who I am right now. And it's okay. It's fine to be like this right now because I know that I want to do something differently, for example. So, and it's just, it's amazing that so much of that is based on our personal lives, and yet it's so important in our workplace as well with our interactions.
Oh, it totally is, because, whether people sort of say, work-life balance, or, trying to keep a barrier between them and put them in their little boxes. But the reality is that our personal life impacts our work life, and our work life impacts our personal life. And so as soon as you embrace that and go, look, there is an impact both ways. And this is the whole thing, is it's like, and then, as I said, embracing that. And I look at it more about, it's a work-life harmony, or a blend, rather than it being about balance, because balance implies everything's equal. And it never is. And there's times where there's going to be more stuff going on in the personal life, and that's going to need a little bit more attention. And then there's going to be stuff where then there's going to be more focus on the work life. But, it's anyone that tries to sort of keep them completely separate, or, deny that they don't impact each other is kidding themselves, really.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that concept of I'm a different person at work to who I am at home. Understandable that there are different social norms and etiquette, etc. at work. Totally get that. But you are still just a whole person, and you are wholly there at work and wholly there at home. That doesn't really change all that much. And, I think that that's a really important point, because a lot of employers have this sense of, why am I responsible for this? Why am I responsible for the mental health of people? They have contractual obligations. I pay them money for a service. I'm talking about, this is the very, very cynical people. Not that I at all agree with it, but that is a mindset that certain employers have.
Yeah.
But that's at their own mistake of thinking that they are a different person, or the employee is a different individual in their workspace. That's not how it works at all. If you want to enhance that productivity, you have to accept the fact that they are a human being bringing things from home that is going to, impact the way that they produce whatever activity that you're asking them to do. So holistically, I think that's a really big piece that employers have to embrace more, because that builds their understanding of why these things are so important. But the last thing I want to touch on in that particular topic that we're talking about is, what do you think the biggest misconceptions are? We spoke about coping. Is there anything else that you think people get really confused about when they're thinking of resilience, whether it's in the workplace or at home?
Yeah, I think that, we obviously touched on coping's a big one.
Yeah.
And then also it's, again, the whole bouncing back thing, because I think it's so common when people talk about, it's how you bounce back and how you do that sort of stuff. And I think that, my approach to it is, I think if you've ever explored the concept of post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And so it's around, you're being challenged, but then you grow, which is not dissimilar to, going to the gym, because you're actually putting your muscles under stress, and then that creates strength. Yes. So there's that one. And I think that that also that resilience is something that you either just have naturally or you don't. And I think that's a big one, because a lot of people think, oh yeah, I'm just not resilient, or I'm just not this. And it's even just the
mindset,
the mindset.
Yeah.
Whereas resilience is a skill.
Yep.
It's like, yes, some people may have a natural more tendency towards it. And I sort of see resilience as a continuum. And it's like, there's at one end where it's like, you're falling apart at everything, and the other part where it's like, oh yeah, that's challenge, great, have it for breakfast.
Yeah.
And we're all going to be at different points along that, at different points in our lives. So the fact that people sort of think you have it or you don't is a big one. And that's a huge part of what I like to share with people, is that, again, it's a skill. It can be built. It can be built using simple things. Because a lot of people say to me, it's like, oh, you're just lucky because you're resilient. I'm like, I work at this every single day. It's not that, oh, I've just been lucky, or it's just been, I've been blessed with it. It's like, I intentionally focus on it.
Yeah.
And if I have days where, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit restless, or, just get a bit cranky and things aren't going to plan. And then if I actually stop and I look at how am I going with my resilience practices and my resilience rituals, 9 times out of 10, I've dropped the ball on something.
Yeah.
And so it is that, again, that it's proactive, because so many people think, oh, you need to be resilient when something goes wrong. It's like, actually, you need to be resilient before something goes wrong.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think, in terms of those misconceptions, like it's quite similar to when people go through quite difficult times in their lives, like obviously, the journey that you've been on and everything, and people assume that that's just, oh, okay, you've been through that, and therefore, you have this ability to withstand things. And absolutely, once you go through life-altering circumstances, it gives you a lot of perspective. But I think it sort of takes away the effort and the work that people put in to really reflect on where their emotions are sitting at. So thank you. That's actually a really, really sort of great insight from that. If a business is, I guess, trying to now navigate this space and go, okay, we need to think about how we're doing things differently, and we need to empower our workforce to be able to manage situations better within reason, not that we're expecting them to do anything unreasonable. What's a good starting point? As a business, it can feel so overwhelming. I know when we're, making strategic changes, it feels like you're just about to, eat that giant elephant. Where do you start taking that first bite from, essentially?
Yeah, I think the big thing is it's around how leaders talk about it. I think how leaders talk about these things makes a huge difference, particularly when it comes to, as you said, around change and things like that. It's the energy that they hold when they're talking about it. So if they actually come at it from, this is actually an opportunity, and they're open about it, and they communicate clearly about what's happening, because I think sometimes a lot of the time people sort of feel that, change has just been done to them, rather than that they're part of it, and they sort of feel a bit in the dark about it. So I think communication is a huge part, and then leaders modeling it themselves. So that's a really big part of it. So that they're showing that they are actually doing stuff as well. So language is one of the easiest things when it comes to resilience. It's like, how do you actually talk about it, and actually talking about it. So that's a big one. And I think also too for leaders, particularly, it's how they actually engage on a regular basis with their teams as well.
Right.
So because each person's going to be quite different. So because sometimes they'll think, and I've been brought in to do, oh, we've got a wellbeing program, we're going to do a resilience talk, and then it's like, oh, so that's it, we're done for the year and we've ticked that box.
Yeah.
Whereas it needs to be an ongoing conversation. So wherever there's regular meetings about other things, then actually have something in there around that. So realizing it's not just a tick box. Oh, we've read a book, we're resilient for life now, we've got that magic power.
Yeah.
So so
if only.
Yeah, if only. So that's a big one. And so particularly I think the part where leaders can have the biggest impact is having regular informal conversations with each of their team on a regular basis. And particularly in the age of hybrid working and working from home, this can be a little bit more challenging because you don't have those organic moments where you know, you might be in the lift together, or you might be in the
Mm.
kitchen making a coffee at the same time, and you just have that real informal conversation. But I think the thing is I think this is the most impactful way, is at least once a week for for a leader to actually have a conversation where they ask their people one-on-one 3 questions.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? What are you working on this week?
Mm.
How can I best support you? And if you have those conversations regularly with your people, then they're going to actually, it'll bring more self-awareness to their situation. But also it then gives that leader the opportunity to sort of get a bit of a benchmark of where their people are at.
Mm.
Because so often, particularly if we're talking about mental health issues and stuff like that in the workplace, then a leader might be completely blindsided when someone ends up having a significant issue. Whereas if those conversations are happening on a regular basis, then that leader is probably going to pick up on something and ask a question before that person even realizes themselves.
Yes.
So I think it's not something that can be just sort of, okay, we're just going to roll out one thing to everybody. It needs to be something that's consistent. And I think the person-to-person stuff is where you're going to have the biggest impact over time.
Yeah, that's so true. Because one of the things that I tell, you know, a lot of my team leaders who are managing their own teams as well, is, you know, the importance of that one-to-one time. Because, and that consistent one-to-one, it doesn't necessarily, once you get to know them or you've worked with them for a little period of time, more often than not, it doesn't end up being about work. That doesn't necessarily mean you're having these heart-to-heart chats that you'd have over a glass of wine or something, or, you know, you're forming very deep connections in terms of their personal life. That may happen, which is great if it does. But what happens is they start telling you about these things that are peripheral to the work, and you get a gauge of where they're at emotionally and how they're tracking. Because if you're doing your role as a people leader and as a manager, operationally, if you're doing your job appropriately, you should probably know already what's happening. 9 times out of 10, you already know if there's a struggle, if they're doing well, etc. If you're monitoring that appropriately, and the one-to-ones end up being an opportunity and a little bit of a platform to, you know, 20-30% probably talk about work and how things are going and checking. That's all fine. But 70% of it ends up being about other things, which is exactly what you want, because then they've had the opportunity to have a platform to engage with you. And then for future reference, they know, okay, if there is something going on or I need to talk about something personal, you've put in the groundwork for them to come and talk to you about it already, which is half the battle, you know.
It really is. And because they will have the confidence then to be able to bring stuff up before it becomes a huge issue. Because that's usually the advice I share with people. People say, how do you have navigate a difficult conversation?
Yeah.
If you have those conversations regularly, you're rarely going to end up in a situation where you have a difficult conversation.
That's exactly right. Because those sorts of things shouldn't come as surprises if you're doing your job as a people leader. And, you know, making the assumption that certain people are quiet and they don't want to have that conversation, or, you know, they don't want to talk about their personal lives. And again, it's not about necessarily the personal life. It's just literally anything other than that work piece that will build that relationship. So yeah, absolutely. And so when, you know, you work with a lot of CEOs and business owners, and I'm sure they come to you with a lot of questions. Are there any common challenges that you see, or any trends in terms of the problems that they come and discuss with you around that resilience piece?
Yeah, I think probably the 3 things that I find are the common ones through the work I have with my clients in the inner circle, and then just general conversations I have with people, is overwhelm's a huge one. Overwhelm is massive. And then, of course, overwhelm can become paralyzing if people don't actually figure out their way out of it. And usually then through working with me, then again, those outside eyes are able to then help and go, okay, so talk me through it. And then being able to do that and then help them to unpack that and then go, okay, so help them to then work out what's important, what's not important. And sometimes, again, if it's a business owner, and particularly in this economic climate, there is just so much stress and they're just feeling that they need to do more and more and more and more because, you know, costs have gone up so much. And then a lot of people, their buying patterns have changed because, again, they're under the same pressure. So overwhelm's a massive one. The other one's feeling isolated, particularly if there's a lot of CEOs feel isolated because they feel that they can't talk to their partners about it, because it's like they don't understand, they want to put that pressure on them. A lot of the time, these business owners and CEOs don't want to talk to their friends, because their friends are like, oh, what have you got to complain about? Because, you know, you're in this great job, you've got this great business. And so they could be, whether it's a bit of professional envy or something like that, it's really difficult. And then, of course, then they're needing to lead the way with their employees and their teams as well. So it's not like they can then approach some of those things with them, because they're meant to have the answers. And so that's why then coming together, you know, with a group of fellow people in that situation, that really helps. And then what I'm finding a lot lately is that they're using really unhealthy ways to deal with their stress.
Yeah.
And whether that is manifesting in, I think one of the things that people don't recognize is actually an unhealthy way to manage stress is overwork. Because people then go, again, I need to do more, I need to do more. And they see
to get on top of things.
Yeah. Or again, because they're so overwhelmed, then they just immerse themselves. I've done this in the past.
Yeah.
You immerse yourself so deeply in work because you think it's constructive, but it's not when it's just at the expense. Because what is happening then is people then are finding that their physical health is suffering, their relationships are suffering. And so they're the big ones. The other one is people drinking too much, taking drugs, you know, neglecting exercise, doing all this sort of stuff. So they're the sort of three things. So it's that the overwhelm, the isolation, and the unhealthy ways of managing stress. They're probably the three biggest themes that I'm sort of seeing in the people that I work with directly, and also the people that I'm sort of communicating with as well at the moment.
Yeah. And I think when they embed themselves so deep in work, what happens as well is you're in and amongst it so much that when you finally get out of it and you should decompress and you should talk to your partner or you should talk to your friends about it, you've just lived in it so much that you don't want to. It's almost like, I just need to close that window so I don't have to think about it for a couple of hours and get respite, but you're not really giving yourself time to process any of it.
No.
And then you just go in and
straight
again.
Back in.
Yeah, exactly. So, and, you know, that's such a good point that you raised about how, you know, people in senior roles, etc. It is isolating. It is an isolating position to be in at times without being able to relate. And I think there's something to be said about showing that vulnerability from time to time. You know, you mentioned that leaders should be talking about it and making it a topic of conversation, but equally, I think there's something to be said that it's okay to show that you can get burnt out as a leader, and showing that it's okay to take time for yourself. And I think that's when you take those steps, you're almost giving the green light to everybody to go, I think it's okay, and therefore you can take from that I think it's going to be okay if you do it too.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you don't do that, then it just breeds this culture of, no, you've got to work until you drop, essentially.
Because that's the thing, is they see that from their leader and then they expect they need to do the same.
Exactly.
So, you know, super simple things is for, you know, particularly for leaders, you know, don't send late night emails.
Yes.
You know, schedule them, do that sort of stuff. Actually walk, if you're in the office, walk out at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know, that's like things like that. Or take some personal time to do something with your family that is in where you would traditionally be working.
Yeah.
So demonstrate some of that flexible work and things like that. I think that's the thing, is because they can tell people to do these things, but if they're not doing it, then there's like, oh, hang on, they're not doing it. So maybe they're just saying that it can, but they really don't want me to.
And, you know, that feeds also into some of the legislative changes that have happened recently about the right to disconnect.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a lot of public figures who had varying opinions on it, obviously. But I remember one from a pretty popular radio host who was like, oh, you know, how is this going to work for successful budding entrepreneurs and startup businesses and everything else? And it's funny because I think to myself, well, if you're getting into that environment, usually it's people who know that this is what it's going to take, and they have the drive and they have the investment, they want to do it. What this is about is ensuring that this is not the norm.
Exactly.
You know, this is not the expectation. If you have the drive to go bananas and work extra hours, and, you know, I think a lot of people in our office now have it under their signature of, I work flexible hours, I'm sending this at a time that's convenient for you. That is not the expectation that I have of you in return. You work in the hours that is going to fit your remit. So it's so interesting to see this mindset of people who are very resistant to the change. They're panicking and they're thinking, oh, it's going to get rid of, this the innate drive that people have. And I'm like, you don't have drive if you don't have rest.
Exactly, and that's it.
No one is going to be driven if other areas of their life don't feel fulfilled, and they are not going. And so there's this misconception where they go, oh, well, you do need to put like 12-hour days in a startup business or whatever it might be. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. There's nothing. I'm not denying that concept. There are situations, I've done it, where there's just been some massive project and it's like, all right, you've just got to get in and get it done. But you know that you can exert that effort because there will be a rest period after, or you've had it before. You're not going to give your all in that moment if you don't see the end game. And like so I think it's interesting that, people expect all of this resilience, but don't understand you can't have that with the appropriate balance of giving yourself time as well.
Yeah.
Letting yourself process all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we go back to the gym analogy, you don't work out the same muscles every day.
That's it.
It's exactly
that's a disaster.
Exactly. That creates injury,
Yep.
not strength. And this is, if we look at it that, I always like looking at, well, how can we relate it to something that people know in a different area? It's exactly the same. You need rest. You need decent sleep.
Yeah.
You can't think clearly. You can't make decisions well if you're tired.
Yeah. It's. I remember someone saying that it's quite scary what's happening at the moment, where they're almost making, what is a baseline physiological reaction of your body saying you are doing too much as a mental health issue.
Yes.
When no, that's not a mental health issue. That's not some medical problem that's, that needs to be treated. That's actually your body just going, you need to rest. You've overdone it. It's got nothing to do with that. So, it's amazing how that's all actually connected all together, and people sort of try to silo all of those particular categories. So we've talked about all the theoretical stuff and all the things that you've experienced and the advice that you've given for business leaders and what it looks like in business. But for the people that are just going through something right now, and, it's all well and good trying to build tools and future-proof yourself, which, is important. But if anybody is in that moment right now and they're thinking about having a conversation with their manager to say, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm really struggling with my workload and I can't keep up. And they are a person that wants to do well at work and something is stopping them. What advice would you give them in this moment?
Yeah, I think it's definitely is to ask for help. It is a big one, because so many people think that asking for help is a sign of weakness, whereas that's actually a sign of strength.
Yeah.
And especially asking for help before it's at that breaking point, I think is really good. And it can just be going to a manager and saying, hey, look, I am feeling overwhelmed. This is what I've got on my plate. Can you help me to prioritize this? Because, that is then sometimes getting someone else to then, again, your manager, just helping you to go. Because when you're overwhelmed, you can't think clearly on these things.
Yes.
So I think that's a big one. I think also too is just making sure that those basic things are being looked after as well. So are you getting enough rest? Are you having a break? Are you turning off? Are you doing these type of things? Are you spending time with your family? But yeah, I think asking for help is a huge one. And again, just it comes down to how you frame it.
Yeah.
Because the thing is if you go into your manager's office and you go in there and you're blaming them for it, then, it's probably not going to be as well received. Whereas if you can just go in and just say, hey, I'm actually struggling with this at the moment. And I think that's the thing that I've found most effective with people is actually going, this is what I've got. Can you help me organize? Can you help me prioritize? And it's a first step anyway. And then hopefully then that will then create a greater conversation around more, okay, is this actually, does the manager have realistic expectations? Because that's the other thing. If there are unrealistic expectations and it doesn't matter how many hours you put in, it's like putting, what they call that, the thing about tipping thimbles down a well or something, and expecting it to fill.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to do it. So I think that's, as a first step, it's putting your hand up and trying not to wait till it's at a crisis point.
And I think a lot of people are scared of what the response is going to be,
of course,
naturally, because there is, if we're being pragmatic about it, there's a very real chance that it's not going to be handled and managed appropriately.
Yeah.
I think there's a very large proportion of people in leadership positions that are fantastic operationally, but not necessarily great at motivating and engaging on a people level. And that's not anything malicious at them or anything untoward in terms of what they're trying to achieve. But I also think that employers shouldn't be scared of asking that question, even if they get a negative response, because ultimately information is power.
Absolutely.
And I think I would rather know the situation than I'm in holistically, even if it's a bad situation, because I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, then you can change jobs or whatever. There is cost of living crisis going on and mortgage stress and everything else. Not everybody can just go, okay, I'm going to change jobs, right? But what it can do, I think, is help you mentally prepare. You can't be resilient, I feel, if you're lying to yourself about what's actually happening around you. And you're not going to get that real picture unless you ask the question.
Yeah.
And even if it is negative, well, then, okay, then you know that you need to find help or support elsewhere, whether that's through your HR team or speaking to another colleague, for example, who you trust. But yeah, I think that question has to be asked.
Yeah, because the thing is, until you ask that question in your head, it's always going to be negative.
That's right.
And the thing is, you can end up creating an even worse situation. And but at least having the conversation,
yes,
and it's not consuming extra headspace thinking about it.
Yes, because it's such a time sink, isn't it? The what if, or you've just assumed.
Yeah,
exactly. And are there any daily habits that people should take? So, like you said, going to the gym, etc. I know one big thing that you mentioned about consistency of doing small little rituals, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you quantify that, what that ritual would probably look like in terms of a daily perspective?
Yeah, the thing I recommend people to do, because it's something that ticks so many aspects of resilience, is a journal. And so an evening journal, and most people go, oh, I can't write, or I don't know what to write,
diary.
or I feel like I have to write lots of stuff. What I suggest people start with is a commitment to write one sentence. And the prompt is, today I had the opportunity to.
Right.
And complete the sentence. Today I had the opportunity to. It's a good way of looking at, well, what were the things that actually happened in the day? Opportunity is, and it could be something that was actually something that was challenging at the time. Could be something that was, because sometimes you go, oh, what was the best thing that happened in the day? But I like to look at it as like, today I had the opportunity to, and then you just complete the sentence. And the number of things that happen there, first of all, it builds that self-awareness, because you're actually being inwardly reflective about your day intentionally on it. Yeah, and I do mine before I go to bed of a night. The other thing is then it gives you an opportunity to also have a look at the language that you're using.
Yeah.
How are you actually describing the things that happened in the day? Because how we describe a situation is how we experience the situation. It gives you the opportunity to maybe rewrite it a little bit. And rather than going, getting ranty about something, then you can actually, when you start to write it, you go, oh, it just really stops you in your tracks a bit. And then you can actually start to change the story about it. So you're you're not changing the facts of things that have happened in the day, but you're actually changing the story about it, which then can actually then help you just move forward, process it, take the learnings from it and move forward.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, it's consistent. And actually July this year will be 10 years that I haven't missed a night.
Wow.
Of writing that. And I think that's, I used to sort of joke about it and say it's probably saved me tens of thousands in therapy over the years, but it's actually true, because having that daily reflection before I go to bed also helps you sleep better, because you're actually doing that bit of empty what are those ruminating thoughts and stuff like that. But if you just start with a commitment to write one sentence, and today I had the opportunity to, sometimes that'll flow on to something huge. Someday it'll just be a sentence. But I think that's probably, as far as what's the thing that is going to take the least amount of time but have the biggest impact, will be the journal.
I really like that prompt, because usually it's something like, today I felt like, when I think that is that can be quite leading. Generally, you're already in a place where you're feeling negative about certain things. If this is the step that you want to take and you're building it, or it could be positive, but I think using that prompt of the opportunity, it also makes you think about, okay, today I had the opportunity to do this, but I didn't. right?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah,
Different angle on
or
it.
something along those lines
Mhm.
where it will at least make you think about some of the good things that have happened and unpack all of that. Also, when you said sleep, I cannot say this enough to people. Sleep. I'm the worst at it. I'm actually just shocking with keeping a regular sleep schedule. But my goodness, your brain detoxes in that time. Give it the time to actually do what it needs to do.
Yeah.
And yes, be mindful of when you have that glass of wine in the evening as well, because I remember that there was someone who was saying that if you have it to, even like 3 hours before you're going to sleep, because of the alcohol in your system, you actually end up waking up in the middle of the night because of it. So as much as that helps you at the end of the day, I won't say no to a glass of bread. 7 to 8 hours sleep, people. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a late convert to that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And, there's something that actually I wanted to mention as well, because you were talking about all the little changes that leaders can do and some of the activities and being vulnerable. And I think one thing that I wanted to mention to our listeners in conjunction with what you've been saying is that when we as leaders make these changes, you have to embrace the fact that there are going to be people who are cynical and not wanting to go on the journey with you.
Absolutely.
And it's got nothing to do with you. It's just where they are, and that it shouldn't stop you from doing it, because ultimately no one is ever going to look back and go, oh, this person tried to make me feel a little bit better. They might think it's corny, or they might think it's, a little strange, but that's more about them than it is about you as a leader.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to mention for any leaders that are listening that don't feel discouraged by that. I think that in itself is showing a little bit of vulnerability, that you're ready to go, you know what, we can all go on a little bit of a journey together. Yes, I accept that some people are going to think that this is ridiculous or this is corny or it's a waste of time, but it doesn't matter, because it ultimately will help someone a little bit. And that is better than not helping anyone at all.
Definitely. And it's the energy around it.
Yeah.
Because it's actually putting something intentionally into practice that is about improving the experience and the well-being of the people in there. And I'm like, I don't think that there can be anything bad about that.
Exactly. The worst that someone's going to do is think that it's silly, but it's no one's ever going to look back on it and go, oh, that was horrendous, or that person treated me really awfully,
or it was harmful.
Yes, exactly. And I think then you're actually showing your commitment to that, and that it's a safe space.
Yeah.
So just thought that was a good thing to mention. Well, I think we've covered a very broad array of everything relating to resilience, but I always love doing this at the end, because while it's great to know about everything that you do in terms of your career and your journey through life, I also want to know some fun things about you too. So I've got a little speed fire round of little questions.
That wasn't that I wasn't wait. This is fun.
Yeah, and there'll be some serious stuff and some silly things in there as well.
Excellent.
But we can give the audience a little bit of insight into who you really are.
Okay.
You may create some enemies in the process. So
okay,
let's go. So describe your business journey in one word.
Adventurous.
What's your go-to resilience mantra?
I usually just say, thank you for the opportunity to be who I am, where I am, with what I have at this moment in time.
I love that. Coffee, tea, or something stronger?
None of the above.
What would it be?
I'm really into bone broth at the moment. I love bone broth with butter.
This is ridiculous, but my husband is crazy about this right now.
Yeah.
And he's got this beef broth that he puts in everything all the time.
Yeah.
And when he does his little fasting situation, which I will never get on board with, although it's apparently very good, bone broth. That's maybe broth. That's the new buzzword.
And they actually let him know a teaspoon of butter in the bone broth. My gosh, I love it.
He's Eastern European, so the word butter is heaven for that.
Butter is brilliant.
It's life. The French are onto something. Best career advice you've received in 5 words or less?
I think that would be don't be selfish.
That's a good one. And one book everyone should read on mindset.
My favorite is always going to be Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. A latter one of his books, Outwitting the Devil, by Napoleon Hill, was published after a long time after he died.
Yeah.
But those 2 books are probably the things that I go back to over and over again.
Fantastic. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. No enemies from me. That's
No.
fine. What's the one thing people misunderstand about resilience?
That it's something that you can just do something once and then you're going to have it forever. It's a daily commitment.
Yep. Brushing your teeth, go to the gym.
Yep.
Morning person or night owl?
Both. I'm just not great in the middle of the day.
Peak times on either side.
Yes.
And if your life had a theme song, what would it be?
Tom Petty, I Won't Back Down.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yes.
Well, Stacey, thank you so much for coming on today's episode. It's been amazing having a great conversation with you about resilience. If any of our listeners want to know more about your work and what you do at the Academy of Resilience, where should they find that information?
Okay, 2 places. Hit me up on LinkedIn. So that's where I'm most active. And if anyone would like to get an ebook version of How to Be Resilient for free, go to howtoberesilient.com.au and I can send one over to them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for coming in and listening today. It's been great having you, and we'll see you for the next episode.